Howdy, folks. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, The Mighty Bjorn, and today for you, sort of kind of have a bit of a Dungeons Dragons video, although it's not really Dungeons and Dragons focused, but it is related, as there's some articles, actually, a few news articles today I've seen from Hasbro, or about Hasbro, if you will. And the article I'm primarily going to focus on is from CNBC, and I will post a link so you guys can go read it, or you can actually read it here because I have the full article in sections. And I'm just going to kind of highlight a couple little things here as I show the article. But please be willing to take time, pause the video, read if you want to, or you can just click the link below in the video description and go check out the article itself. But apparently, Hasbro is laying off a bunch of workers. Now, I'm a little confused on this. I've seen the numbers range anywhere from 900 to 1,100 workers. Um, the articles just kind of seem to conflict with each other. So I want to say it's at least 1,000. I'll put it that way. And basically, what it's got to do with is it's got to do with actually slumping toy sales. And of course, the stocks have also been slumped too, and it's kind of a surprise to see this as it is during a holiday season. You would think actually the toy sales would be up, but it seems that the toy sales are down. Now, I do have a theory on this problem, and it's mostly got to do with the type of toys that Hasbro does. They focus things on like Barbie and Transformers and stuff like that, and well, really hasn't been a good year for movies. So when a lot of your toys is licensed toys, I mean like Star Wars, things of that nature, well, that's probably going to kind of cause some issues as well. And the article does point out that they've had a decline in sales revenue. Now they've had some stock in certain areas, but or stock going up in certain areas, but mostly it's just been down across the board for toy sales. Now, there's also a memo put out by the CEO, Chris Cox, and basically, yeah, it's just talking about reinvesting, kind of how they regret that they're going to have to lay off this many workers, especially close to the holiday season. They're going to be making changes to their supply chain. Basically, they're just kind of reeling and trying to minimize the amount of damage they have. And with that being said, well, things for the company actually really hasn't been going since the pandemic had ended. Uh, there could be a couple reasons for this. I do have a few theories on said reasons, and I'll get to those here in a little bit. But basically, it comes down to, yeah, things are not good at Hasbro right now. And honestly, it's not good at other places too, which I'll get to that in a bit. And actually, as you go through this article, it talks about taking a voluntary early retirement program, as well as maybe even shutting down offices, which actually is discussed here, where they're talking about shutting down the Providence, Rhode Island office, which that office, from my understanding, doing some deeper digging, the Providence, Rhode Island office has actually been downsized quite a bit over the past year. And apparently, they're also going to be downsizing it some more now with these layoffs. So it kind of sounds like they're going to be shutting that office down. Not saying that is the only office, they do have other offices. And when the lease, their plans right now is when the lease runs out in January of 2025, they're just going to be packing up the office and getting out of there. Uh, if you're downsizing your office, it kind of makes sense to do such. It also goes into looking ahead of what they're going to be doing, which I know a little bit of what they're going to be doing, which I'll be talking to here in a bit, or about in a bit, and that's actually got to be related to that section will be more or less related to Dungeons and Dragons, but it says it's cost cutting is not a strategy, which they're right. It's not a strategy because they have to essentially, kind of reel back, figure out where they're going to, place investments in the future and try to regrow the company. And that's kind of where they have to go right now. They have to develop new brands, new advertising, etc. Because if they only cost cut, basically that means there's absolutely zero change in what the company is doing, and the company is just going to pretty much continuing going belly up. Now, I'm sure at this point there is some pinko leftos that are going, hooray, the big evil corporation is taking a hit. Well, yeah, but I wouldn't necessarily say this is some big evil corporation taking a hit, as there's pretty much been worker layoffs all across the board, especially in the United States. Even before I started recording, I was seeing an article about Ford laying off workers because there's just no demand for Ford cars, which is kind of bad news for the car market because Ford is usually one of the stronger running car companies when it comes to the car market in the United States, as well as actually Ford does have some pretty good strong sales actually across the world. Now, before the right wing conservatives wants to go out there and be like, oh, them chickens took our jobs. No, folks, these are jobs that are just up and fucking off into the abyss. They're not going anywhere. Some of these jobs have, but in the case of Hasbro, they're just going to the abyss. And they might come back if Hasbro can kind of straighten things out. I'm sure they will come back, but yeah, that's actually the case. It's got nothing to do with China or Mexico or some other foreign country going, oh, their labor is so cheap. No, it's got nothing to do with that, especially in this case. And if you look at the stock market across the board, especially over the past 2 years, the stock market's actually been going, it is down. Yes, it's got moments where it jumps back up, but then it goes back down. And when you actually sit there and look at the average over long term, the stock market's actually down. And it's been going down, and it's going to probably continue to go down because, just to be honest, this whole Build Back Better thing has been nothing but a dumpster fire. I know a lot of people personally who have been laid off their jobs, who have had to take in reduced hours, reduced pay, etc. Some people I know are working multiple jobs now. So it's the whole Build Back Better thing has been an absolute dumpster fire. And it's just going to continue to get worse. Looking at the things ahead, I don't want to get too involved in that, but one question that I see coming up with this, especially from the tabletop RPG community, what will this mean for Dungeons and Dragons? Because Dungeons and Dragons, they have a few more. Well, Wizards of the Coast has a few more um, releases for fifth edition, and then they're supposed to be starting to their releases for sixth edition in 2024. I believe it was like February or March or something like that. So fairly early 2024, we're supposed to start seeing new releases for Dungeons and Dragons and a new edition drop. I can't answer that right now. I would imagine that this whole thing with Hasbro is going to disrupt the whole Dungeons and Dragons plans a little bit, as well as any plans that there was for Magic the Gathering, because Hasbro being the parent company for Wizards of the Coast. But there's not really been any information released on that end. Now, what does all this mean for Hasbro as a whole? Well, I wouldn't say their future looks the brightest. Now, with that being said, they are the parent company of Wizards of the Coast. Once upon a time, Wizards of the Coast was its own company, and then they merged with Hasbro. I don't know what this will mean for Wizards of the Coast either, as well, Wizards of the Coast once upon a time did stand on their own. They were the company that procured Dungeons and Dragons from TSR, and they were also the company that started Magic the Gathering. So, yeah, Wizards of the Coast, I believe, could go on its own again, as a possibility, but I also believe Wizards of the Coast is definitely going to stick with Hasbro until absolutely necessary for them to get out. That's even if then, because of how the parent company thing works. Who knows the legalities? Wizards of the Coast might have to go down with the ship, and someone else maybe have to come in and actually buy Wizards of the Coast from Hasbro. We'll have to see how that works out if Hasbro actually does go down with the ship. No matter which way you look at it, the foundation is cracking. And honestly, it's cracking everywhere. It's not just Hasbro. So, this is kind of across the board type thing. Unfortunately for Hasbro, Hasbro is going to be one of those companies because of the nature of the company where they primarily make board games, tabletop RPGs, toys, stuff of that nature. That is stuff that's going to be kind of put on the back burner when people open up their wallet and see it's empty. They're just not going to buy toys for their kids. That's going to be one of those cost cutting measures, which that just unfortunately is how it works. With that being said, what's the future of D&D as a whole? Well, I would argue with Dungeons and Dragons as a whole is Dungeons and Dragons will survive. Dungeons and Dragons doesn't need Hasbro, doesn't need Wizards of the Coast. It will continue to survive. Will it continue to thrive? Not necessarily, but with that being said, Dungeons and Dragons has already outlived one company, particularly TSR. Um, I guess technically it's kind of outlived two when it kind of outlived the original Wizards of the Coast, but I'm not sure. Dungeons and Dragons actually might have been bought by Wizards of the Coast after Hasbro acquired Wizards of the Coast. I'm not 100% sure of that. My history on that end's a little foggy, but either way, Dungeons and Dragons is going to survive. It's going to survive by the player base. The player base is going to play old editions. There's lots of D&D clones out there. I mean, there's Pathfinder and there's many other D&D clones out there. So tabletop role playing is definitely going to survive, and I would say Dungeons and Dragons itself will survive. If Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro has to go down, another company I'm sure will be more than willing to go in there and buy the Dungeons and Dragons licensing and to continue carrying the Dungeons and Dragons ball. I don't see Dungeons and Dragons going anywhere anytime soon. It just might not survive under the Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro banner. We'll have to wait and see. Either way, folks, I'm going to wrap today's video up at that. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you very much for tuning in and have yourself a wonderful day.